They say the high country changes a person. Up in the Northern Tablelands of New South Wales, the air gets thin, the winters turn biting, and the silence, well, the silence can get heavy. Most folks know the small town of Guyra for its quiet tomato farms and its chilly top-of-the-range reputation. But in April of 1921, that silence didn't just break, it was pulverized. What started as a few unexplained thuds on a weatherboard cottage turned into a full-scale physical assault that left the police baffled, 80 armed volunteers terrified, and a 12-year-old girl at the center of a paranormal storm that defied the very laws of physics. Stones falling from cloudless skies, thuds with the force of a sledgehammer coming from inside the walls. This isn't a campfire tale, folks. This is a documented piece of history that remains one of the most terrifying sieges ever recorded. I'm the Midnight Rider, and you're tuned in to Channel 19 Mysteries. Before we head down this dark stretch of road, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to join the convoy, and drop a comment below. Have you ever experienced something that science just couldn't explain? I want to hear about it. Keep your eyes on the road and your ears open. Now, let's get into tonight's story. The Siege of Guyra. If you drive about 4.5 hours south of Brisbane, or perhaps 6 hours north of Sydney, you would eventually find yourself climbing into the Northern Tablelands of New South Wales. It is a place of high altitude, thin air, and biting cold winters. Here, sitting at over 4,300 feet above sea level, is the small town of Guyra. Today, Guyra is known for its tomato farms and its chilly weather, often dubbed the top of the range. But in April of 1921, this quiet, unassuming agricultural hub became the epicenter of one of the most violent, well-documented, and terrifying paranormal sieges in Australian history. This wasn't just a story of a few creaky floorboards or a door that opened on its own. This was a physical assault on a family that left police baffled, investigators terrified, and an entire town armed and waiting for a fight with an enemy they couldn't see. This is the story of the Bowen family and the entity that came to be known as the Guyra ghost. To understand the terror that unfolded, you first have to understand the setting. In 1921, the Bowen family lived in a small, weatherboard cottage just outside the main township of Guyra. It was a modest home, typical of the era, with thin walls, a corrugated iron roof, and a layout that kept you never far from anyone else in the house. Living inside were William Bowen, a hard-working council ganger who spent his days repairing roads and railways, his wife, Catherine, a stern but loving matriarch, and their 3 children. At the center of this storm was the middle child, 12-year-old Minnie Bowen. Minnie was a quiet girl, tall for her age, with dark hair, and what newspaper reporters later described as peculiar, dark, introspective eyes that never seemed to miss any movement in a room. She was the kind of child who blended into the background, unnoticed, until the night the house decided it didn't want to be quiet anymore. It began on the night of April 8th, 1921. The family had just settled in for the evening. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the biting chill of the tablelands was settling in. William and Catherine were in the kitchen, perhaps finishing up the dinner dishes, while the children were getting ready for bed. Suddenly, the silence of the countryside was shattered by a tremendous thud against the side of the house. It wasn't a tap. It wasn't the sound of a branch scraping the window. It sounded, as William would later describe to the police, as if a sledgehammer had been swung with full force against the weatherboards. The entire cottage shuddered. William, a man not easily rattled, immediately assumed the worst: vandals or pranksters. He grabbed a lantern and rushed out the back door, expecting to catch some local boys running off into the darkness. But the yard was empty. The dog, usually a reliable alarm system, was silent, cowering under the house. William circled the property. The moon was out, casting long shadows across the dry grass. There was no one there. Confused, he went back inside. Probably just a loose board or the house settling, he might have told Catherine, trying to calm the rising tension. But as soon as he sat down, it happened again. Thud, then again. Thud, and then the sound changed. It wasn't just wall-shaking blows anymore. It was the sound of hail, sharp, staccato cracks against the corrugated iron roof. But it wasn't raining. The family huddled together in the main room as the assault intensified. Stones began to rain down on the roof, rolling down the corrugated iron with a deafening clatter. William ran outside again, this time angrier. He stood in the yard, looking up at the clear, starry sky. There were no clouds. There were no trees directly overhanging the house. And yet, stones, smooth, river-polished stones, were falling out of the air and striking his roof. He couldn't explain it, and things were about to get much, much worse. The next night, the activity didn't just resume, it evolved. The local police were called. Sergeant J.J. O'Connor, a veteran officer known for his no-nonsense attitude, arrived at the cottage with a skepticism that you can practically feel through the historical records. He was a man of the law, a man of facts. Houses don't get attacked by invisible forces. Someone was throwing stones, and he was going to catch them. O'Connor stationed himself inside the house while a constable patrolled the perimeter. The plan was simple. The moment a stone hit, the constable outside would tackle the thrower. The sun went down. The house grew dark, lit only by the flickering kerosene lamps. Crash. A window in the kitchen shattered. Glass sprayed across the floor. "I'm on it!" the constable outside yelled, sprinting toward the side of the house where the impact had come from. He swept his torch beam back and forth. Nothing. No footprints in the dust. No fleeing figure. Just a dark, empty paddock. Inside, Sergeant O'Connor was startled by another sound. Thump. A stone had hit the wall right next to his head. But here was the detail that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The stone hadn't come from outside. It had hit the inside wall. O'Connor looked down. There, rolling across the floorboards, was a stone about the size of a walnut. He picked it up. It was warm to the touch. He looked at Minnie. She was sitting in a chair across the room, her hands visible, her face pale and terrified. There was no way she had thrown it. Over the next few nights, the Bowen cottage became a fortress. The attacks grew so violent that the family could no longer sleep. Stones were smashing through windows, but in defiance of physics, sometimes the glass would fall outward, as if the stone had come from inside, yet the stone would be found inside the room. Other times, stones would smash through a window and land gently on a bed without bouncing, as if placed there by a hand. News traveled fast. In 1921, a story like this was dynamite. The Guyra mystery hit the papers. The Sydney Morning Herald, the Sunday Times, and regional papers began sending correspondence. The little cottage was suddenly surrounded, not just by darkness, but by crowds. Locals, terrified that a madman was loose, began to show up with shotguns. On one particularly chaotic night, nearly 80 armed volunteers surrounded the Bowen property. They formed a human chain, standing shoulder to shoulder, facing outward into the dark, daring the stone thrower to show himself. Inside the ring of steel, the house was still being pelted. Stones fell between the wall of the house and the wall of armed men. If someone was throwing them from outside the circle, they would have to be an Olympic-level pitcher to lob rocks over the heads of 80 men in the dark and hit the house with such precision. If they were inside the circle, they would have been seen. It was impossible, and the violence was escalating. The atmosphere in Guyra was reaching a breaking point. Fear is a contagious thing, and when you mix fear with firearms, tragedy is often the result. During the height of the siege, the tension in the town was palpable. Everyone was on edge. People were seeing shadows where there were none. One evening, a neighbor's family, who had been closely following the events at the Bowen house, succumbed to the hysteria. A young boy, only about 5 years old, found a loaded revolver that had been left out by his anxious parents, presumably for protection against the ghost or the prankster. Thinking it was a toy, or perhaps just mimicking the tension he saw in the adults, he pointed the weapon at his sister. The gun went off. The girl was shot in the head. Miraculously, she survived, though the bullet remained lodged in her skull, a permanent reminder of the panic that had gripped the town. This incident sobered the community, but it didn't stop the stones. If anything, it added a layer of dark, tragic dread to the proceedings. The entity, or whatever it was, wasn't just breaking windows. It was causing real-world chaos. As the police flailed, failing to find a culprit, other figures entered the stage. Enter Mr. Harry J. Moores. Harry Moores was not your average ghost hunter. He was a businessman, an intellectual, and a close personal friend of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. Like Doyle, Moores had a deep interest in spiritualism, but he approached it with the mind of a detective. He wanted proof. Moores traveled to Guyra, determined to solve the puzzle. He didn't just sit and watch, he deconstructed the house. He climbed onto the roof and actually removed sheets of corrugated iron so he could peer down into the wall cavities. He set up elaborate traps with threads and flour to catch anyone sneaking around. He interviewed Minnie, watching her like a hawk. In one report, Moores described an incident that defied all logic. He was standing in the bedroom, watching Minnie. The room was well lit. Suddenly, a loud bang resonated from the ceiling, and a stone fell straight down, hitting the floor. Moores immediately inspected the ceiling. There were no holes. The roof iron was intact. The ceiling boards were seamless. The stone had apparently passed through solid matter. He later told the press, "I am convinced that no human hand threw those stones." Moores also noted something specific about Minnie. She was clearly the focus. When Minnie was in the kitchen was attacked. When she moved to the bedroom, the stones followed. When she was sent to her grandmother's house in Glen Innes, 25 miles away, the Bowen cottage went silent and the grandmother's windows began to smash. It was classic poltergeist activity, centered around a prepubescent agent, violent, chaotic, and seemingly intelligent. The most chilling chapter of the story involves a man named Ben Davy. Davy was a local from the nearby town of Urala and a student of theosophy and spiritualism. While the police were looking for a prankster and Moores was looking for scientific anomalies, Davy was looking for a spirit. He arrived at the Bowen cottage during a lull in the activity. He sat with the family, who by this point were exhausted, their nerves frayed. Catherine Bowen, the mother, was near tears. Minnie sat in the corner, silent and sullen. Davy had a theory. He knew that Catherine had another daughter, May, who had died just 3 months before the start of the hauntings. May had suffered a long, painful illness. Her death had been a crushing blow to the family. Davy looked at Minnie. "Ask who was knocking," he suggested. The family was hesitant. This was 1921. Engaging with spirits was seen by many as dangerous or sacrilegious, but they were desperate. Minnie looked at the wall. Thump. "Is that you, May?" Minnie whispered. The room went deathly silent. Then, from the wall, thump, 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 3 distinct knocks. In spiritualist circles, 3 knocks often signified yes. Davy pressed on. He asked the entity to communicate. What followed was a seance that those present would never forget. Through a series of knocks, 1 for A, 2 for B, and so on, or perhaps a simpler system of confirmation, Davy claimed to establish a dialogue with the deceased sister, May. According to the witnesses, Minnie suddenly seemed to go into a trance-like state. She turned to her mother, her face wet with tears, and spoke, but the words didn't seem to be hers. Or rather, the message wasn't something a 12-year-old would typically say. "Tell mother I am in heaven," Minnie said, her voice trembling. "Tell her I am quite happy. Tell her it was her prayers that got me here." Catherine Bowen collapsed into sobs. The activity in the room ceased. The violent thumping stopped. For a moment, the terror was replaced by a profound, heartbreaking sorrow. The message was one of reassurance. May was okay. She was watching over them. It was a perfect, cinematic climax. The ghost wasn't a demon. It was a lost child trying to comfort her grieving mother. But the real world rarely allows for such neat endings. The seance might have brought emotional closure to the family, but it didn't satisfy the New South Wales police force. They were being humiliated in the press. They had 80 men surrounding a house and couldn't catch a little girl throwing rocks. It was an embarrassment. The Inspector General of Police sent top detectives from Sydney to take over. They weren't interested in dead sisters or floating stones. They wanted a confession. They focused all their pressure on Minnie. She was the common denominator. She was the one present at every event. They separated her from her parents. They grilled her for hours. Imagine being 12 years old. You've just lost your sister. Your house is being destroyed. Armed men are staring at you through your windows. And now, big city detectives are yelling at you, telling you that you're going to jail if you don't admit you did it. Finally, Minnie cracked. She admitted to throwing a few stones. She told the police she had tossed a couple rocks onto the roof to scare her little sister. The police pounced on this. They released a statement declaring the mystery solved. It was just a naughty child seeking attention. The newspapers ran the headlines, "Guyra mystery, a hoax." But was it? If you look at the confession closely, it falls apart. Minnie admitted to throwing some stones, but she steadfastly denied causing the wall-shaking thuds. She denied the stones that fell inside closed rooms. She denied the incidents that happened while she was being physically held by police officers. There were simply too many witnesses who saw things Minnie couldn't have done. 1. The double knock. One witness, a reliable local, reported that he and Minnie were on opposite sides of the room. He walked up to the wall and tapped a rhythm with his knuckle. Immediately, the wall tapped the same rhythm back. Minnie was 10 feet away, in plain sight. 2. The weights. Sergeant O'Connor, in his initial reports, noted that the thumping on the walls was so powerful, it shook the pictures on the other side of the room. He estimated it would take a grown man swinging a sledgehammer to create that kind of force. Minnie was a slight 12-year-old girl. She physically could not have generated that power, especially without being seen winding up for the blow. 3. The angles. The sheer geometry of the stone throws baffled everyone. Stones came through windows at 90-degree angles, turning corners in midair. One stone smashed through a window, hit the opposite wall, and then fell straight down, defying momentum. 4. The sheer volume. Hundreds of stones were collected. If Minnie was hiding them in her dress, she would have been clanking when she walked. The confession felt coerced away for the police to save face and close the file. Even the locals didn't buy it. They knew the Bowen family. They knew Minnie. They knew that what they had seen and heard in that house wasn't the work of a child playing pranks. Eventually, the activity just stopped. Poltergeist cases, historically, often burn out. They are intense, high-energy events that last for a few weeks or months and then fade away. The Guyra ghost followed this pattern perfectly. Minnie Bowen grew up. She eventually married and became Minnie Ince. By all accounts, she lived a quiet, normal life. She rarely spoke of the events of 1921. When pressed by journalists later in life, she would simply smile enigmatically or give non-committal answers. She never retracted her confession, but she never expanded on it either. She died in 1988, taking the truth of what really happened in that weatherboard cottage to her grave. But the legend didn't die with her. The Guyra ghost remains one of the few poltergeist cases in the world where the police were not only present, but filed official reports confirming the inexplicable nature of the events. It is a case where the rational explanation that a 12-year-old girl fooled 80 armed guards, seasoned detectives, and a friend of Conan Doyle seems more unbelievable than the paranormal one. Was it the spirit of May Bowen reaching out from the other side to tell her mother she was safe? Was it Minnie manifesting a powerful telekinetic energy through the trauma of her grief? Or was it something else, something residing in the high, cold air of the Tablelands, waiting for a chance to knock? If you ever find yourself driving through the New England region of New South Wales, and you pass the sign for Guyra, take a look at the old houses on the outskirts of town. Roll down your window, listen to the wind, and hope that the only thing you hear is the rustle of the grass and not the heavy, impossible thud of a stone against the wall. Because in Guyra, the stones didn't just break windows, they shattered reality. So, what is your verdict on the Guyra ghost? Was Minnie Bowen a 12-year-old mastermind capable of fooling seasoned detectives, a friend of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and 80 armed men? Or was there truly something unexplainable throwing those stones from the darkness of the Northern Tablelands? Let me know your theories in the comments below. I'd love to see if you buy the official police confession, or if you think the truth about what happened in that weatherboard cottage is far more terrifying. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's strangest sieges, please hit that like button and subscribe to Channel 19 Mysteries. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss a case. And if you have a story of your own, whether it's a brush with the paranormal, a creepy encounter, or something you just can't explain, I want to hear about it. Send your stories to mycreepyencounter@gmail.com. We might just feature your experience in a future episode. I'm the Midnight Rider. Until next time, stay safe out there.